I have a question for you, and it's a very important one. Is your car safe to drive? Can you see safely? Can you steer safely? Can you stop safely?
They looked like harmless quirks from a simpler time, until the crashes came and we realized those old car features were never safe to begin with. What did we lose when style mattered more than survival? There was a time when hopping into a car meant sitting down, turning the key, and hoping for the best. Early cars came with no seatbelts, none. Drivers and passengers rode completely unsecured, bouncing around the cabin like marbles in a tin can. At low speeds, maybe that was manageable. But as engines got faster and roads got longer, the danger multiplied. Even in the 1940s and 1950s, many manufacturers treated seatbelts as optional accessories, if they offered them at all. Safety just was not part of the design language yet. People believed being thrown clear in an accident was safer than being restrained. But the reality was brutal. In a crash, unbelted occupants slammed into metal dashboards, windows, or were ejected entirely. The statistics were horrifying, but it took decades for public perception to shift. By the 1960s, a few models began offering lap belts, and some safety advocates started raising the alarm. But most drivers ignored them. Seatbelts were seen as restrictive, unnecessary, even cowardly. It was not until laws changed and crash data became undeniable that automakers were forced to make them standard. Today, driving without a seatbelt feels unthinkable. But not that long ago it was the norm, and every ride was a gamble. For a while, lap belts felt like progress. After all, something was better than nothing, right? These belts stretched across your hips and buckled near your side. But that was it. No shoulder harness, no upper body restraint. In a crash, your torso snapped forward like a whip, often slamming into the dashboard or steering wheel. And worse, that belt across your lap, it could do real damage. Internal injuries, broken spines. Seatbelt syndrome became a medical term describing the kind of trauma caused by lap-only restraints. They were installed widely through the 1950s and 1960s, particularly in the front seats. Back seats? Often nothing at all. Automakers advertised them as a safety revolution, but crash tests eventually revealed their limits. Lap belts held you in place, sort of, but they did not prevent head injuries, neck trauma, or spinal compression in high-speed impacts. It took until the late 1960s for Volvo to introduce the three-point harness we know today. The rest of the industry followed, slowly and reluctantly. Before padded dashboards, car interiors were designed like industrial kitchens, cold, hard, and entirely unforgiving. Steel dashboards were common from the 1930s through the early 1960s. Gleaming, painted metal stretched from door to door, often decorated with chrome trim, deep-set dials, and absolutely nothing soft. It looked sharp, literally. In a crash, the dashboard became a blunt force weapon. There was no cushioning, no give. Your head, your knees, even your teeth. Everything could, and often did, collide with that unyielding slab of steel. The injuries were horrific. Skull fractures, facial trauma, broken bones from hitting knobs, buttons, or decorative trim. Some dashboards had ridged or pointed designs, making them even more dangerous. Safety engineers began raising concerns in the late 1950s, but automakers were slow to change. After all, the dashboard was a visual centerpiece. It needed to shine. It was not until safety advocates like Ralph Nader began publishing damning evidence that regulations caught up. By the late 1960s, padding became standard thanks to new federal rules. Today, the idea of slamming into bare metal at 60 miles per hour sounds insane. But for decades, it was part of the ride. Until the late 1960s, most front seats in American cars were just that. Seats. No headrests, no upper support. Just a padded back that stopped near your shoulders, leaving your neck exposed and unsupported in the event of a crash. In rear-end collisions, that meant instant whiplash. The sudden jolt of the impact snapped the neck backward and forward with brutal force, leading to everything from strained muscles to serious spinal injury. And it happened all the time. Whiplash was so common it became a punchline. Chiropractors knew the injury well. Insurance companies did too. But for years, nobody demanded headrests. Some luxury cars had them as options, and aftermarket headrest kits were sold for a while. But they were rare. The public simply accepted the risk, assuming that whiplash was just the cost of doing business in a crash. In 1969, federal regulations finally made front seat headrests mandatory in the United States. The change was quiet, but significant. Studies showed a dramatic reduction in soft tissue neck injuries in rear-end collisions. Suddenly, every new car had a little cushion above the seatback, and no one complained. Modern windshields are built to crack, not shatter, but that was not always the case. Early car windshields were made of basic plate glass, the same kind used in storefronts or old home windows. In a crash, this glass broke into sharp, deadly shards that turned the cabin into a blender. It sounds dramatic, but it happened often. One impact was all it took for the windshield to explode inward, sending jagged pieces of glass flying into passengers' faces, arms, and eyes. It was not just collisions. A sudden rock, a branch, or even a severe pothole could cause spiderweb cracks that compromise the entire pane. Early solutions included laminated glass, which sandwiched a plastic layer between two sheets of glass. It held together when broken, but it took years to become standard. Automakers were slow to adopt it due to cost, and drivers were mostly unaware of the difference, until it was too late. By the 1960s, safety glass was finally mandated in new cars, dramatically improving survivability in crashes. Today's windshields crack under stress, but they do not break apart into flying razors. It is easy to take that for granted. But before laminated safety glass, one unfortunate moment could turn a windshield from a viewing screen into a weapon. Early cars were built tough, sometimes too tough. Without crumple zones, the body of the car was rigid and unforgiving, like a steel cage with no give. In a crash, all that force had to go somewhere, and more often than not, it went straight to the people inside. The logic at the time was that stronger cars were safer cars, but engineers eventually realized that a solid frame does not absorb energy. It transfers it. So in a head-on collision, instead of the car taking the hit, your body did. Bones broke, organs ruptured, and the impact felt like being thrown against a brick wall at full speed. For decades, automakers resisted changing the design. After all, who wanted a car that bent like a soda can? But safety experts argued that a car should collapse in a controlled way, using its structure to absorb the shock and protect its occupants. The turning point came in the 1960s, when crash tests showed just how deadly rigid frames could be. Slowly, crumple zones became part of the design, front and rear sections engineered to fold, bend, and deform in specific ways during a crash. Before collapsible steering columns became the norm, that long metal shaft in front of you was more than a way to steer. It was a direct line to disaster. In older vehicles, especially those built before the mid-1960s, the steering column was a solid piece of metal mounted directly to the frame. That meant in a head-on collision, when the front of the car crumpled inward, the steering column was pushed straight back, right into the driver's chest or face. It did not happen every time, but when it did, the results were catastrophic. The column could break ribs, puncture lungs, or worse. Drivers were essentially impaled by the very mechanism they used to control the car. For years, the design was never questioned. It was just the way cars were made. But as crash data accumulated and injury reports became impossible to ignore, engineers began searching for alternatives. By the late 1960s, regulations required collapsible steering columns, designed with joints, sleeves, and energy-absorbing materials that would collapse in a crash rather than stab the driver. It was a simple fix with life-saving results. Today, collapsible columns are standard, and nobody thinks twice about them. But in the early days, driving meant trusting that a steel spear aimed at your chest would not become your worst enemy. The steering wheels of the past were not just tools, they were hazards. Made from hard plastic or thin metal, these wheels offered no padding, no cushioning, and zero give in a crash. They looked sleek, often chrome-ringed or color-matched to the interior, But they were built more like dinner plates than safety equipment. In a frontal collision, your body would surge forward, right into the wheel. The result? Broken noses, cracked teeth, facial injuries, and sometimes worse. The wheel did not bend. It did not absorb. It simply waited for impact, and impact came fast. Safety experts warned about it for years, but change was slow. Automakers focused more on design than survivability. A wheel that collapsed or deformed was seen as a failure, not a feature. It took time, lawsuits, and a growing pile of medical data to prove otherwise. By the 1970s, padded steering wheels began appearing, sometimes with foam centers, soft vinyl coverings, or breakaway components. Later, airbags added another layer of protection. The classic bench seat had style, space, and a whole lot of risk. Found in most cars before the 1980s, especially sedans and pickup trucks, the front bench seat was basically a padded couch bolted to the floor. It allowed 3 people to sit across the front: driver, passenger, and sometimes an unlucky person in the middle with nowhere to hold on. These seats were wide, flat, and often slippery, especially if they were covered in vinyl. But the real problem? No support. No side bolsters. No safety belts in the early years. In sharp turns or sudden stops, passengers could slide sideways or forward, colliding with the dashboard, the windshield, or each other. And during crashes, the bench seat offered nothing to keep you in place. Some models eventually added lap belts, but even then, without shoulder harnesses or modern restraints, the seat did little more than keep you sitting down, until the laws of physics took over. The front bench seat began fading away in the 1980s as bucket seats became more popular for comfort and safety. They provided better body support and allowed for center consoles with storage, gear shifters, and airbags. Today, you rarely see a bench seat outside of old classics and vintage trucks. They might look cool in movies and retro photos, but back in the day, they were one sharp turn away from chaos. Believe it or not, for years the passenger side mirror was not standard equipment. That is right. Many cars rolled off the lot with just one side mirror, usually mounted on the driver's door. No second mirror, no symmetry, and definitely no blind spot awareness. The logic at the time was that a driver could simply turn their head to check the right side. But on highways, in traffic, or while merging, that was far from safe. Changing lanes became an educated guess. Some drivers added aftermarket mirrors, others stuck with the single view and hoped for the best. This was especially dangerous in wide cars or low-slung models where visibility was already limited. Rear-view mirrors helped, but they only told part of the story. It was not until the 1980s that passenger-side mirrors became common, and even then, they were sometimes an extra cost option. Safety advocates pushed for their inclusion, citing accidents caused by blind spots and limited rear visibility. Eventually, regulations caught up, and now dual side mirrors are required by law in most countries. Today, many cars come with blind spot monitoring, lane change alerts, and wide-angle glass. But for decades, half the rear view was missing, and nobody thought twice about it. Back in the day, some cars didn't ask you to turn a key or push a button. Instead, they handed over the power to a little knob on the dashboard. These pull-knob ignition switches were often located right within reach of curious fingers, or worse, in the perfect spot to be jostled during a sudden stop or collision. With a simple tug, the engine roared to life, and just as easily, it could be cut off. The idea was convenience, but the reality was chaos. Parents quickly realized that kids could start the car without meaning to. Mechanics dreaded explaining why the vehicle wouldn't start, only to find the knob halfway pulled out. And in an accident, it was all too easy for that same knob to be yanked mid-impact, either shutting the engine down or sparking other issues. It was one of those designs that seemed clever in theory but proved risky in practice. Later innovations in ignition were all about safety and control, features sorely lacking in this setup. Still, the pull knob holds a strange kind of nostalgic charm. It reminds us of an era when cars were simpler, but also far less forgiving. Push-button transmissions were supposed to make driving feel modern, like operating a spaceship instead of a sedan. but in practice, they created more confusion than convenience. Found in some cars during the 1950s and 1960s, particularly in models like the Chrysler Imperial, this system replaced the traditional gear lever with a row of buttons mounted on the dashboard. You pressed a button for drive, reverse, or neutral, and off you went. That was the theory. The reality was messier. Drivers unfamiliar with the system often hit the wrong button under pressure, especially in emergencies. Shifting into reverse while rolling forward? That could happen. The buttons could stick, break, or misfire, causing hesitation when quick reactions were needed most. Some systems required a complicated sequence of presses to engage gears properly, and if the electrical components failed, you were stuck. While the idea of decluttering the cabin was noble, push-button transmissions proved unreliable and potentially dangerous. They also created panic when a driver reached for a non-existent gear stick during sudden stops. Eventually, most manufacturers abandoned the idea in favor of more intuitive floor or column-mounted shifters. Today, push-button gear selectors are making a cautious comeback in modern vehicles, but with improved electronics and clearer logic. Back then, though, they were a novelty that flirted with danger. Back in the day, children were often treated more like luggage than passengers. There were no child locks, no restraint standards, and certainly no car seats as we know them today. Kids sat wherever there was room, on laps, in the front seat, or even lying flat across the rear window shelf. It was not uncommon to see a toddler bouncing around the cabin while the car cruised at highway speeds. Parents did what they could, often wedging a pillow between the child and the dashboard as makeshift protection. But there were no legal standards, no crash testing for child safety, and no structured guidance on how to transport children safely in a moving vehicle. It was all left to guesswork. Worse, early versions of child seats were designed more for convenience than protection. Some had metal frames, others were barely more than fabric slings. None of them were built to handle impact forces. It was not until the 1980s that proper standards for child restraints began to appear in American law. By then, too many injuries and tragedies had highlighted the danger of doing nothing. Today, child seats are rigorously tested, and vehicles are required to have rear seat child locks, latch systems, and passenger airbags that deactivate when a car seat is detected. But the road to that progress was paved with oversight and far too much risk. Having a gas tank mounted in the rear seems risky enough, but some older cars, especially in the 1930s and 1940s, had something even worse: a front-mounted fuel tank. Yes, the gas tank was positioned near the front bumper, just behind the grille or tucked beneath the engine compartment. It might have made refueling easier in some cases, but it created a massive explosion risk in any frontal collision. The moment the front end crumpled in a crash, fuel lines could rupture and pour gasoline near hot engine parts or exposed wiring. In some documented cases, even low-speed accidents turned deadly because of fuel leaks and resulting fires. There was also the issue of heat. Having gallons of gasoline sitting next to an engine already running hot made for a dangerous combination, especially in summer traffic or long trips. Engineers initially overlooked the hazard, focusing more on balance and packaging than crash survivability. But as cars got faster and roadways more crowded, the danger became impossible to ignore. Gradually, the industry shifted fuel tanks toward the rear and then to safer mid-body positions. Safety regulations in the 1960s and 1970s finally outlawed front-mounted tanks in passenger vehicles. It might be hard to believe, but rear passengers in many cars had no seatbelts at all, even well into the 1980s. The assumption was simple and dangerously wrong. The back seat was safe enough. Automakers focused on protecting front passengers, where most crashes were believed to occur. But in rear-end collisions or side impacts, backseat occupants could be thrown forward with massive force. Without restraints, they slammed into seatbacks, windows, or worse, became projectiles, endangering everyone else in the car. Children and adults alike were vulnerable. Even when lap belts were eventually added to rear seats, they were often buried under the cushions or ignored entirely by passengers who had grown up without them. Shoulder belts came later and for many years were only available in the center rear seat on high-end models. It was not until the 1990s that rear seat belt laws began to appear across the United States, and even then, enforcement lagged behind. Crash test data and injury reports finally forced the industry to respond. Today, rear seatbelt use is common and legally required in most places. But the journey there was slow and marked by a false sense of security. Old door handles looked cool, chrome-plated, sculpted, and sometimes shaped like little rocket wings. They were style statements as much as functional parts. But they had a hidden danger. Many of these handles protruded from the body and had sharp edges or push-button mechanisms that stuck out like hooks. In side-impact crashes, they could catch on clothing or limbs. Worse, they sometimes failed to open when hit from the wrong angle, or jammed completely. In rollover accidents, the shape of these handles made it easy for doors to swing open or pop out of alignment, especially if the latch mechanism was not properly engaged. In a time before side airbags, side impact beams, or reinforced door structures, the handle itself could become a point of injury. As safety regulations evolved in the 1960s and 1970s, designers were forced to rethink how door handles worked. Flush-mounted handles became the new standard, designed to reduce snagging, improve aerodynamics, and most importantly, minimize the risk of accidental openings during a crash. Today's handles are often integrated so smoothly into the bodywork that they disappear completely when not in use. Suicide doors sound dramatic, and they were. Technically called rear hinge doors, they opened backward, with the hinges mounted on the trailing edge instead of the front. They were common in cars from the 1930s to the 1950s and made rear seat access feel grand, almost like stepping into a limousine. But they came with serious risk. If the latch failed, or worse, if the door was not fully closed, it could swing open while the car was in motion. The wind would catch the door like a sail, yanking it wide open and possibly pulling the rear passenger out with it. Seatbelts were rare in those days, so anyone sitting in the back was fully exposed if the door opened unexpectedly. Some models had locks, but they were mechanical and often unreliable. Even at low speeds, an open suicide door could cause a dangerous situation on city streets. At highway speeds, it was terrifying. The term suicide was not an exaggeration. It reflected real danger. Eventually, car makers phased out the design in favor of safer, front-hinged doors. A few modern luxury cars have reintroduced rear-hinged doors, but only with advanced locking systems, sensors, and child safety features. Back then, though, it was just you, a handle, and the hope that nothing popped open mid-turn. There was a time when smoking and driving went hand in hand, and car interiors were built to accommodate the habit. Enter the dashboard-mounted ashtray and cigarette lighter, two of the most dangerous conveniences ever installed in a car. These metal lighters heated up in seconds, glowing orange hot and just waiting to be fumbled or dropped. Drivers balanced them between fingers while steering, flicked ashes into tiny trays already brimming with smoldering butts, and somehow thought this was normal. The hazards were everywhere. Hot lighters fell into laps, igniting clothes. Ashes blew back into eyes through open windows. Kids in the front seat had easy access to both, often with unfortunate results. Even when not in use, the lighter socket itself became a temptation for small fingers or a source of electrical problems. Fires started, accidents happened, and yet nearly every car had one. Today's cars have USB ports where those old lighters used to be, and the ashtray has vanished entirely. But for anyone who remembers digging through it for spare change or burning their thumb trying to use it, the dashboard ashtray and lighter combo is a relic of a riskier time. Take a drive in a classic car from the 1960s or 1970s, and you'll notice how good the visibility is. Wide open views, thin window frames, minimal obstructions. It feels like freedom until you think about safety. Those sleek, thin roof supports, called pillars, looked great and kept things airy, but they had one massive flaw. In a rollover crash, they crumpled like soda cans. Structurally, they just weren't built to hold up the weight of a car turned upside down. Roofs would collapse inward, windows would explode outward, and anyone inside was suddenly in a lot more danger than they realized. The design was more about aesthetics than engineering. Cars looked lighter, cleaner, more open. but they weren't safer. Not even close. It wasn't until crash data started piling up that manufacturers realized how dangerous these thin pillars were. Over time, they bulked them up. Reinforcements were added. Crash standards changed. Visibility went down, but survival rates went up. Those old cars might look better in a photo, but in real life, those dainty little roof supports offered next to no protection when it really mattered. Sometimes beauty came at the cost of basic survival. There's no denying it. Classic convertibles were cool, the top-down look, the wind in your hair, the open skies above. But under all that fun was a serious flaw. There was absolutely nothing between you and the pavement in a rollover crash. These early convertibles didn't have roll bars, rollover protection, or anything sturdy enough to keep the roofline from collapsing if things went upside down. If a convertible flipped, the thin fabric roof gave way instantly. The windshield frame? Not strong enough to help. Passengers were often crushed, thrown, or pinned in place with devastating results. And yet, people lined up to drive them. It was the ultimate symbol of freedom, even if it came with serious risk. Over the years, awareness grew. Engineers began adding roll hoops, reinforced A-pillars, and eventually pop-up bars that deployed if a rollover was detected. But those early convertibles? Pure style, zero safety net. Looking back, it's wild how little protection they offered. The sun may have shone brighter with the top down, but so did the danger. For every joyful cruise, there was the risk of a nightmare flip. It was a gamble, one that often ended in tragedy. In the name of innovation, car makers in the 1960s introduced swing-away steering wheels, wheels that pivoted to the side when the driver opened the door, making it easier to slide in and out of the car. It sounded clever, and for a moment it felt futuristic. But this moving part added mechanical complexity and, more importantly, danger. The mechanism that allowed the wheel to swing also made it less stable in a crash. Some even failed mid-drive, leading to loss of control. Others wouldn't lock back into place properly, especially after years of wear. Worse still, the steering system itself became more vulnerable in an accident, with the swing feature reducing the structural integrity of the column. In short, something designed to improve convenience ended up compromising one of the most essential components of driving: the ability to steer. Today, you'd never want a steering wheel that can wobble or shift without warning, but back then, it was billed as a luxury perk. Eventually, the swing-away idea faded away, not because people stopped liking it, but because it became clear that safety had taken a back seat to style. The 1957 Chevrolet El Morocco was what happened when one man decided the Bel Air needed a tuxedo and built it himself. Designed by Canadian entrepreneur Reuben Allender, the El Morocco was a custom luxury version of the Chevrolet Bel Air, restyled to mimic the upscale look of a Cadillac. Fewer than 30 were ever made. The changes were subtle but elegant: modified fins, custom trim, and ornamentation that made it feel richer without shouting. It used standard Bel Air underpinnings, but transformed them into something that looked completely bespoke. It was aimed at buyers who wanted Cadillac style without Cadillac money, and for a moment, it worked. The El Morocco had a certain charm: modest, clever, and full of personality. But in the end, the market was too narrow. Most buyers either went full Cadillac or stayed with standard Chevrolet offerings. Allender stopped production after just a couple of years, and the El Morocco faded into obscurity. Today, finding one is like discovering buried treasure. They do not show up often, and when they do, collectors recognize them as a rare slice of American design ambition, an attempt to bridge luxury and accessibility, built in tiny numbers, but with big heart. The 1969 AMC AMX was short, sharp, and ready to fight. Unlike most muscle cars of its era, it had no back seat, just two seats, a long nose, and a fastback profile that looked like it had been shaped in a wind tunnel, then sharpened with a blade. This was not a family cruiser. This was a driver's machine. Compact compared to its heavyweight rivals, the AMX made up for its size with pure attitude. The grille was tight, flanked by squared-off headlights that gave it a stare-down look. The fenders bulged like a coiled muscle. The rear was clean, sculpted, and purposeful, with tucked-in taillights and a short overhang that made it look constantly in motion. AMC gave it real guts, offering engines up to 400 horsepower from a throaty V8 that made this little car punch far above its weight. But beyond speed, it was the design that set it apart. It looked like something hand-built in a custom shop, not mass-produced in Detroit. Inside, the cockpit was no frills, just the driver, the machine, and the road. No distractions, no apologies. The AMX never topped the sales charts, but it earned something better: respect. It became a cult classic, beloved by those who knew it was never trying to be like everything else. And that was its real power. The 1969 AMX was bold, brave, and proudly different. Even today, nothing else looks or feels quite like it. The 1970 Dodge Challenger RT was built to make a statement, and it did so with every inch of its wide, aggressive stance. It was long, low, and mean. The kind of car that filled up a parking space like it owned the whole lot. What made the RT special was not just the way it looked, it was the way it moved. With an optional 4406 pack under the hood, this car packed serious heat. That setup meant 3 two-barrel carburetors working together to turn fuel into fury. And the result? Tire-melting acceleration and a deep rolling thunder that echoed down the block. The Challenger offered more than just straight-line speed, though. Inside, it was plush and roomy, with options galore: bucket seats, rally gauges, a pistol grip shifter. It felt like luxury until you floored it. Then it felt like war. In high school parking lots, this was the dream car. Posters on walls, drawings in notebooks. A Challenger RT meant you were somebody. Even now, decades later, that feeling has not faded. If anything, it has grown, because they do not make muscle like this anymore. They just do not. The Chevrolet Caprice Classic was everywhere, and for good reason. It was big, boxy, and built like a brick wall. You saw it on police chases in every television show. You saw it outside the grocery store. You saw it in your own driveway. It was a car that served everyone, from cops to cabbies to proud suburban dads. The Caprice had room for 6, a trunk big enough for 2 weeks of groceries, and a ride so soft it could put you to sleep. But it was not just a cruiser. It had power under the hood and presence on the street. The squared-off lines, stacked headlights, and full chrome bumpers made it look like it was cut from stone. And the sound of its V8 rumble? You could hear it coming down the block. It was a family car, yes, but it had muscle in its bones. Kids rode in the back without seatbelts, bouncing over potholes like it was nothing. Moms drove it to school drop-off. Dads used it for long commutes. And somehow, it never quit. The Caprice Classic was not glamorous, but it was unforgettable. And if you ever rode in one, you remember the way the door shut with a deep, solid thunk. The 1989 Eagle Premier was Chrysler's last-minute experiment to combine American muscle with European precision, and it failed before most people even noticed. Developed during a partnership with Renault, the Premier was meant to be the flagship for Chrysler's new Eagle brand, created to appeal to upscale, tech-savvy buyers who wanted something fresh. It had clean lines, a roomy cabin, and a surprisingly modern suspension for its time. But the marketing was muddled. The Eagle brand was barely known, and Chrysler's own dealers struggled to explain what the Premier was supposed to be. Was it a Renault? Was it American? Was it even a luxury car? Under the hood, the Premier had a V6 with decent power and a reputation for smoothness. But quality control was shaky. Electronics acted up. Trim fell apart, and resale value plummeted almost instantly. Worse, the styling was bland. It was a car that aimed for the future but felt like an awkward leftover from two companies that no longer trusted each other. Renault soon pulled out of the American market. Chrysler merged the Eagle lineup into its other brands. And the Premier was quietly phased out with little fanfare. It was not the worst car of the 1980s, but it may have been the most forgettable. A failed alliance given 4 wheels and a confusing nameplate. The 1971 AMC Matador machine is so rare that most people have never even heard of it. It was a performance package tucked into AMC's lineup at a time when the company was trying to prove it could compete with the Big Three. Unlike the better-known Rebel machine, the Matador version was quieter, subtler, but no less serious. It came with a high-output V8, special striping, heavy-duty suspension, and a sport-tuned interior. But hardly anyone ordered it. The styling was sharp and aggressive, with a fastback roofline and bold trim. Yet buyers seemed unsure. Was it muscle or was it luxury? AMC did not make it easy, offering limited advertising and almost no promotion. The result? A car that existed in the shadows. Very few were built. Fewer survived. But those who found one discovered something rare. A factory sleeper with serious performance and almost zero hype. The Matador machine was never going to be a household name, but it had muscle car DNA in its bones. It was a final, defiant attempt by AMC to swing at giants. And even if it missed the spotlight, it landed with power. Today, it is a ghost from the edge of the muscle era. A rare, bold move lost in the shuffle, and all the more special for it. The 1959 Cadillac Eldorado was not just a car. It was a spectacle on wheels. It had tail fins that reached toward the sky, sweeping backward like wings ready for liftoff. At the end of each fin sat bullet-shaped tail lights, glowing like afterburners. The chrome dripped off the body in every direction, gleaming from the massive front grille, the trim, the mirrors, even the door handles. Inside, it was more like a lounge than a vehicle. Plush seats, bright colors, and enough polished metal to blind you at sunset. The dashboard stretched wide, filled with buttons and dials that felt like airplane controls. It was long, it was loud, it was unapologetically American. Designed during the height of the jet age, the 1959 Eldorado was Cadillac's boldest vision of what luxury and modernity looked like. But under all that shine was serious engineering. A V8 engine gave it power to match the spectacle. It rode smooth, glided even. Driving it was not about getting somewhere. It was about being seen. And seen you were. Pulling up in a 1959 Eldorado felt like stepping onto a red carpet. It was everything big, bold, and beautiful about the post-war dream, on 4 gleaming white-wall tires. The 1982 Oldsmobile Omega tried to bring premium appeal to General Motors' compact X-body lineup, but ended up dragging Oldsmobile's reputation down with it. Sharing its platform with the notoriously flawed Chevrolet Citation, the Omega had front-end alignment issues, rust problems, and cheap-feeling materials. The ride was choppy, the steering wandered, and the overall build quality was inconsistent at best. Oldsmobile added some faux wood and nicer trim, but it was not enough. Buyers quickly saw through the dressing. The Omega lacked identity. It was too expensive for budget shoppers, and too basic for anyone seeking true luxury. Reliability was spotty, repairs were common, and resale value sank like a stone. Worse, it shared too much DNA with its struggling siblings, the Buick Skylark and Pontiac Phoenix, so it could not stand out even within General Motors' own family. By the mid-1980s, the Omega name quietly disappeared. It was a car that never earned loyalty, never built momentum, and left barely a ripple in automotive history. A forgettable badge on a forgettable platform. The 1972 Chevrolet Nova SS350 was proof that big things can come in smaller packages. It was a compact car by size, but there was nothing small about its performance. The Supersport badge on this Nova meant it was ready to deliver old-school muscle in a tighter, more affordable frame. The 350 cubic inch V8 provided solid horsepower, quick acceleration, and a deep growl that could hold its own at stoplights and strip runs alike. It was not the fastest car on the road, but it was quick enough to leave a lasting impression. The Nova SS was loved for its balance. It was light, nimble, and had just enough grunt to feel fast without scaring your wallet. It looked the part, too. With a cowl induction hood, rally wheels, and clean, aggressive body lines, the Nova SS had a no-nonsense appearance that told the world it meant business. Inside, it was simple but effective. Sporty bucket seats, straightforward gauges, and not much fluff. This was a muscle car for the everyday driver. Something you could take to work, take to the drag strip, and take home without feeling like you were making a compromise. Today, the Nova SS 350 is one of the best entry-level muscle cars you can still find from the era. It was not flashy, but it was fast, and that was more than enough. The 1970 AMC Rebel machine was AMC's boldest swing at muscle car dominance, and it did not go unnoticed. Dressed in red, white, and blue paint with graphics that looked like they were ripped off a flag, it had one message: this car meant business. The machine came standard with a 390 cubic inch V8, pushing out well over 300 horsepower. But it was not just about the engine. It had heavy-duty suspension, beefed-up brakes, and a hood scoop with a functional tachometer. This was AMC stepping into the muscle arena and saying, "We are here too." And they were not bluffing. The Rebel machine could run the quarter mile in under 14 seconds and held its own against better-known names like the GTO and Chevelle SS. Inside, it was simple but tough: bucket seats, floor shifter, and enough attitude to go around. Only about 2,000 machines were built, making it one of AMC's rarest performance cars. It may not have the name recognition of its big three rivals, but among those who know muscle, the Rebel machine is a symbol of defiance. AMC was always the underdog, but this car proved they could bite just as hard. The 1956 Lincoln Continental Mark II was not about flash. It was about refinement, the kind that spoke in hushed tones and polished details. With a long hood, subtle tail fins, and a roofline that seemed to float, it exuded grace from every angle. No wild curves, no loud stripes, just smooth surfaces, tight panel gaps, and the kind of craftsmanship more often found in European Grand Tourers. Lincoln wanted to build the best car in the world, and in many ways, they did. The Mark II was priced higher than a Rolls-Royce at the time, but it justified every dollar with hand-built attention. The paint was polished to a mirror. The interior was stitched in fine leather and accented with real chrome and brushed metal. It did not shout for attention. It expected to be noticed quietly. And it was. Celebrities drove it, business moguls ordered it, and even President Eisenhower was photographed stepping out of one. The 1956 Mark II was not just a car, it was an experience. A deliberate, understated American kind of beauty that never had to raise its voice to be heard. The 1971 Plymouth Hemi-Cuda was not just a car, it was a threat on wheels. With its legendary 426 Hemi engine under the hood, it delivered over 400 horsepower with a sound that shook the pavement. It had attitude baked into every inch. The shaker hood screamed aggression before the engine even turned over. The blackout grille, the wild colors, the billboard stripes, all of it said one thing loud and clear: this car was not here to play nice. It was one of the rarest, meanest machines ever built, and only a handful were made, making each one a piece of street-legal treasure. It had a presence that pulled attention like gravity. At car shows or quarter-mile strips, the Hemi-Cuda always stood out. Drivers knew they had something special, and the competition knew it too. But the Cuda was more than muscle. It was a symbol of what American cars once dared to be: loud, fast, and built for no one's approval. Today, it is one of the most sought-after classics on Earth, not just for its speed, but for what it stood for. This was the moment before the rules caught up, when raw power still had the last word. The 1983 Honda Prelude was supposed to usher in a new chapter of Japanese sportiness, but it stumbled at the starting line. This was the first-generation Prelude to reach American shores, and expectations were high. Honda had already built a reputation for quality, value, and clever engineering. But the Prelude, despite its sporty looks and pop-up headlights, lacked the excitement buyers were promised. The engine was weak, the acceleration was slow, and reliability, usually Honda's strongest suit, suffered from teething problems in the new design. Suspension components wore out quickly, interior trim rattled, and while the car handled decently in corners, it felt gutless in straight-line performance. It looked like a sports car. It acted like an underpowered commuter. Competing against more powerful coupes and hot hatches, the Prelude fell flat. It did have its fans, mostly for its futuristic dash and tidy size, But even loyal Honda buyers expected more. Later generations would fix these flaws and turn the Prelude into a beloved icon. But this first outing left a bland impression. Today, the original Prelude is rarely remembered, not because it was terrible, but because it was underwhelming, a rare stumble from a company that usually got it right. The 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1 was the gentleman's muscle car, refined on the surface but ready to throw a punch under pressure. Only 678 were built, and everyone was a carefully balanced blend of speed and style. Most people think of Buick as quiet, comfortable, and conservative. The GSX shattered that image. Painted in bright yellow or white with black racing stripes, it looked like a street fighter in a dinner jacket. But what really made it special was under the hood, a 455 cubic inch V8 that made monstrous torque and could leave most competitors gasping. The Stage 1 performance package added even more muscle, tightening the suspension, boosting the compression, and turning it into a true track threat. Inside, it was pure Buick. Comfortable seats, elegant trim, a dash that looked like it belonged in a luxury lounge. But mash the throttle, and the GSX came alive. It was not built in massive numbers. It was not plastered across every magazine cover. But those who knew, knew. The GSX Stage 1 was the car that proved Buick could play the muscle game and win with class. The 1969 Dodge Charger RT was Detroit's idea of a muscle car with movie star looks. Its long, lean, fastback roofline flowed into the sculpted rear like a wave frozen mid-crest. The front grille, hidden behind flip-up doors, looked like a sneer. It was the kind of car that made traffic stop just to let it pass. From the bold body contours to the Coke bottle curves along its sides, everything about it said speed. And it delivered. The RT badge meant it came with serious power, often a 426 Hemi under the hood, rumbling like distant thunder. But the Charger was more than just a drag strip demon. It had presence, charisma. It showed up on television and movie screens and instantly became iconic. Whether it was leaping over hills in car chases or rumbling through small-town streets, the Charger had an unmistakable aura. Inside, it was all muscle, tight cockpit, rally-style dash, and heavy doors that shut with a satisfying thunk. The 1969 model, in particular, captured everything Dodge did right: beauty, brawn, and a little bit of rebellion built into every inch of its steel. The 1971 Buick GSX Stage 1 was the kind of muscle car that wore a tie to the fight and still knocked you out in the first round. Buick had a reputation for smooth, luxurious rides, cars built for long cruises and quiet comfort. But the GSX flipped that script without tearing it up. Under the hood sat the Stage 1 455 cubic inch V8, a torque-heavy powerhouse that quietly outperformed some of the loudest names in the game. With well over 500 pound-feet of torque, it could flatten your spine at a stoplight. Yet it did all this without screaming for attention. The GSX came in two standout colors, Saturn yellow and Apollo white, both with bold racing stripes, rear spoilers, and blacked-out grills. It looked sharp, not showy. Inside, it was all Buick. Soft bucket seats, full instrumentation, and just enough wood trim to remind you that you were not in a stripped-down street racer. But when you dropped the hammer, everything changed. It was fast, refined, and completely intimidating when it needed to be. The GSX Stage 1 did not need gimmicks. It was a high-class assassin on wheels. Today, it is remembered as one of the most underrated muscle cars of the era. It proved that luxury and performance were not opposites, and that a little elegance could still tear up the pavement when the time was right. Sometimes the real threat is the one that stays quiet until you are already in the rear view. The 1985 Merkur X R4 I was Ford's bold experiment to bring European performance to American buyers, but it tripped on its own branding before it even left the lot. Sold under the unfamiliar Merkur name, this sporty import came with a turbocharged engine, rear-wheel drive, and edgy styling. On paper, it had the right ingredients, but the name meant nothing to most buyers and the strange pronunciation confused everyone. Worse, it was sold only through select Lincoln Mercury dealers who often had no idea how to market or service it. Parts were expensive and hard to source. Maintenance was tricky, and the turbo lag made city driving a chore. Enthusiasts appreciated the rally-inspired chassis and the hatchback practicality, but the average American car shopper did not know what they were looking at, and quickly stopped caring. Reviews were mixed. Support from Ford was lukewarm, and by the time anyone figured out how to spell the name, the car was gone. It lasted just a few short years before being phased out. The Merkur XR4 Ti was not a bad car. It was a misplaced one. A European idea dropped into a market that just was not ready. Or maybe Ford just got tired of trying to explain what it was. The 1971 Pontiac GTO Judge convertible marked the end of an era, and Pontiac knew it. Only 17 were built, and each one carried the swagger of the Judge name with a little more grace and a little less volume. By 1971, muscle cars were already under pressure from insurance costs, emissions rules, and changing tastes. But Pontiac still wanted to go out with style. The Judge convertible came loaded with options: bold stripes, hood scoops, and the signature Judge badging. Under the hood, buyers could choose serious V8 power, including the legendary 455 cubic inch engine. It was muscle, but it was refined. The convertible body made it feel more relaxed, more confident, like a heavyweight champion enjoying a walk in the sun. Inside, it offered everything you would expect from a premium Pontiac: bucket seats, rally gauges, and just enough flash to remind you it was still a performer. But 17 cars? That makes it one of the rarest production Pontiacs ever built. Each one represents the very last breath of a car that once defined bold American performance. When you see one today, you are not just looking at a car. You are looking at the final page of a muscle car legend. The 1932 Ford Model B Coupe, lovingly nicknamed the Deuce Coupe, may have started as an honest workhorse, but it became the heart of hot rod culture. Its simple, boxy shape made it the perfect canvas for teenage gearheads in the 1940s and 1950s who stripped it down, souped it up, and turned it into something wild. The body was made of steel. The lines were clean. The front grille looked like a chrome shield, and with the right stance, chopped roof, lowered suspension, big wheels in the back, it looked downright mean. But even in stock form, the Model B Coupe had a quiet dignity. It was the first Ford with a 4-cylinder and V8 option, giving drivers a real choice in performance. Its proportions were near perfect: compact, balanced, and tough-looking. No car better captured the do-it-yourself spirit of post-war America. The Deuce Coupe was more than metal. It was identity. The Beach Boys sang about it. Young men built their reputations on how theirs looked and how fast it ran. Some were painted wild colors, others left in raw primer, but they all shared one thing: soul. Even today, spotting one feels like shaking hands with history. The 1974 Ford Gran Torino Sport had style, swagger, and a touch of television magic. Thanks to the red and white paint job made famous by Starsky and Hutch, it became one of the most recognizable cars of the decade. But even without the Hollywood spotlight, this car had plenty to offer. Under the hood, you could get a 402 or 460 cubic inch V8, engines that moved this big-bodied beauty with surprising authority. The Gran Torino Sport was heavy, but it could hustle. Its long, wide stance gave it a presence that was hard to ignore, and the fastback roofline gave it a sporty edge. It was part muscle, part personal luxury, and all confidence. Inside, the Gran Torino offered comfort that bordered on opulence: big seats, soft surfaces, and a dash that wrapped around the driver like a cockpit. It was not a lightweight racer, but it had character. Lots of it. Today, the Gran Torino Sport is often remembered more for its screen time than its performance, but fans of the car know better. It had the muscle, it had the look, and it carried itself with the kind of laid-back strength only the 70s could deliver. The 1966 Ford Fairlane 500R Code was the kind of car that existed quietly until the light turned green. Built specifically for drag racing, it came equipped with a 427 cubic inch dual-quad V8 that turned the mid-size Fairlane into a rocket. Ford never intended it for mainstream buyers. This was a factory-built street weapon, offered in extremely limited numbers. Some say under 60 were made. It had lightweight body panels, no frills inside, and was usually ordered without a radio or even heater. Everything about it was purpose-built. The R-Code Fairlane did not boast wild graphics or loud colors. It whispered in steel and roared in motion. Most were sold to drag racers and dealerships with connections to the performance scene. On the strip, it was lethal. On the street, it was invisible unless you knew where to look. Today, finding one is like spotting a unicorn. Many were raced hard and wrecked. Few survived. And those that did are now cherished by collectors who understand what they are looking at. The 1966 R-Code Fairlane is not famous, but that only makes it more desirable. It is a muscle car built for insiders, not the masses. The 1970 Oldsmobile 442 W30 was the kind of car that slipped under the radar until it roared past you in a blur of stripes and thunder. With bold muscular lines and a low planted stance, it was a sleeper only to the untrained eye. The front end was all business, quad headlights flanking a wide grille with a subtle but menacing hood scoop hinting at the power beneath. The W30 package was not just a badge, it was a beast. Under the hood lived a 455 cubic inch V8, tuned for raw acceleration and torque you could feel in your chest. But it was not just fast, it was refined. The 442 had a kind of restrained aggression. Power without the screaming decals, beauty without the vanity. The side profile was tight and purposeful, with just the right amount of chrome and a rake that gave it attitude. Inside, it felt like a gentleman's racer. Bucket seats, a floor-mounted shifter, and gauges that spoke only when spoken to. The 1970 W30 was one of the finest expressions of American muscle. Brutal, yes, but dignified. It did not need to shout. It only needed to move. The 1970 Mercury Cougar Eliminator was muscle in a tuxedo. It shared its bones with the Ford Mustang but added a touch of class to the chaos. Longer, smoother, and wrapped in a bit more chrome, the Cougar looked refined, but do not let that fool you. Under the hood, the Eliminator meant business. It came standard with a 428 Cobra Jet V8, and if you dared, you could option it up to the Boss 302. The performance was there, the sound was there, and the looks? Pure attitude with a split front grille and signature hidden headlights that gave it a stealthy stare. The Eliminator package added stripes, spoilers, and a dash of NASCAR spirit, giving this sophisticated ride a proper snarl. Inside, it was plush. Vinyl seats, wood accents, and a clean dash reminded you this was still Mercury, still about comfort and elegance. But hit the gas and the rear tires would sing. This was a car that could cruise quietly down a boulevard 1 minute and blow the doors off a rival the next. The Mercury Cougar Eliminator was proof that you could have power without losing poise, and today it is remembered as the muscle car that wore a suit but never backed down from a fight. The 1969 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am convertible is one of those cars that sounds like a myth, until you realize it is real and rarer than almost anything else. Only 8 convertibles were built that year, making it one of the rarest Firebirds ever produced. It carried the first use of the Trans Am name, which would go on to become a legend in American performance. But in 1969, it was just getting started. These early Trans Ams were all white with blue racing stripes and featured functional air scoops, spoilers, and unique badging. Under the hood, most were powered by the Ram Air 400 engine, more than enough to push the lightweight convertible to serious speeds. But it was not just about performance. The car had a clean, aggressive look that stood out even without screaming for attention. Inside, it was pure Pontiac, sporty but comfortable, with a driver-focused dash and no wasted space. Because of their low numbers, most of these convertibles went straight into private collections. Seeing one in the wild is almost impossible. The 1969 Trans Am convertible is more than just a rare Firebird. It is the origin story of one of Pontiac's most iconic names, captured in a body style that vanished almost as soon as it arrived. If these dangerous old car features sparked a memory or made you flinch, share your story below. Tap like if you're glad they're gone, and subscribe for more rides through the past.